And thank you. Here with us today is David Maeda, which is the Director of Elections for the state of Minnesota. And he is here going to be talking about some of the election processes and the things that the state has done and the involvement that they are in the securing of our Minnesota elections. So with that, I will turn it over to David.
Thank you, Diane, and good morning, members, Chair and members of the board. As Diane mentioned, my name is David Maeda. I'm the Director of Elections for the Minnesota Office of the Secretary of State. Just as way of background, I'll talk a little bit about my career in elections. I have been involved off and on in election administration for 26 years. My first election that I administered was in 1996, the state primary and the presidential election that year. I was the Washington County election supervisor during that period. I moved on to become the Hennepin County election supervisor in the mid-2000s, and then the bulk of my career was actually spent as a city clerk of the city of Minnetonka. And as you are probably aware, one of the duties city clerks have is administering elections for the city. I've been fortunate to be able to take some leadership roles throughout my career in elections. When I was with Hennepin County, I was the chair of the Association of Minnesota County Officers Elections Committee, and serving in Minnetonka, I chaired the League of Minnesota Cities Elections Task Force. So I've been heavily involved with shaping election administration processes and procedures throughout my career, and I was appointed to this position in January of 2019. It's been a great opportunity to further the work in elections administration. I am here today to speak to you on the reasons our election systems are secure, accurate, and fair. And as Diane mentioned, I'll go through some of the processes that are in place that have been in place for most of my career to ensure that. Some of the processes are newer as we have proceeded to learn more about election and keeping them secure. One of the things I'll mention that's a great opportunity for myself, in 2016, elections was designated as critical infrastructure by the Department of Homeland Security. And what that means is myself and others in our office are able to get classified briefings on a regular basis from our federal partners at Homeland Security, the FBI. We also work with our state partners, the BCA, the Fusion Center, and Minute, which is the branch of IT for the state government, to make sure our systems are secure. In early 2020, one of the things we did was we followed Illinois' lead in creating what's called a Cyber Navigator program. Illinois has 10 of them. We were able to hire one. I was fortunate enough to offer the job and hire a former Navy intelligence officer to become our Cyber Navigator. His name is Bill Ekblad. He has hit the ground running. He has worked with all 87 counties, not only the election staff, but the IT staff as well, to make sure there's a nexus between the election systems and IT, to make sure that they are aware of all the resources available that mostly from Homeland Security, but there are things available to make sure that all county systems that touch anything elections related are secure. And so Bill works with all 87 counties on a daily basis. The good news is last month we actually doubled our team. Bill was able to hire a deputy cyber navigator that will make our system even more robust. But that's a very important piece of what we have done since 2016. Diane, first of all, I want to thank everyone that has come out to talk today, because obviously there's a lot of passion for elections. In my 26-year career, I think I share that passion. We all want to make sure our elections are done right. But some of the things that have already been mentioned, I'll kind of elaborate more on, and some of the pieces we have in place to ensure our elections are indeed accurate and secure. Before any voting equipment is used in our state, it requires both federal certification and state certification. The federal certification comes through an accredited test lab, the Election Assistance Commission, which is the big federal agency overseeing elections, finds different test labs. They accredit them based on certain criteria. So it first has to get certified at a federal testing lab, and it's a very thorough examination of the voting system all the way down to the source code level. So they're looking at everything to make sure that the voting systems work the way they're supposed to work. When the vendor is done with the federal certification process, they come to us for state certification. What we require, among other things, is a copy of that test lab report. And so we go through the report to make sure that it covered everything we need covered. And then we put the election system through vigorous testing to make sure it meets Minnesota state election law. Everything in Minnesota election law has to be met by our state certification. And basically, a lot of that comes through running hundreds and hundreds of ballots through each of the different tabulators that the vendor associates with that version of their election management system to make sure that all their equipment is working correctly. And once we're done certifying, we notify the counties. At this time, we have 3 election vendors in our state that have certified voting systems. The vast majority of the state uses the election system and software, which is ES&S, a company out of Nebraska. They're used in 78 of our counties. 6 counties, including yours, use Dominion, and then we have a third vendor called Hart InterCivic that is used in 3 counties. I met last week with a 4th vendor that wants to get their system certified in Minnesota in 2023, so we'll keep an eye on that. Competition in any of the vendors I've always supported. I think we get better service from vendors when there's options available for our county and local partners. Testing was talked about a little bit. I'm not so dismissive of the public accuracy testing. It's a very important part of the process because it is a public test. And it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. Diane and her staff, all our local partners that have voting equipment, they test the equipment very thoroughly prior to the public test because a public test cannot have any errors. It has to be a completely error-free test. If it's not, they have to reschedule the public accuracy test and show that the equipment is 100% accurate going into election day. So that's a very important part to know that our election systems are working the way they're supposed to work. The other piece I'll mention, so on election day, I think people get a little bit, they look at our website and think those are official results. They are not, they're unofficial results. The actual official results from any of our voting equipment is the tabulator tape that contain, in the morning, the election judges run a tape that show nobody has a vote on the ballot, or in the tabulator, so a 0 tape. And then at the end of the night, and it's all connected to one tape, they run the results tape, and that's what the election judges are certifying at the polling place on election night, that the number of ballots in the ballot box matches the number of signatures of the people that have signed the roster or e-poll book. And I think if those numbers don't balance, they have to balance. I mean, our law, if there's more ballots in the ballot box than the number of people that have signed in, our law requires the election judges to randomly remove excess ballots, not count them. So that is where the certification, I think there's questions about how, when you canvass the results and certify your county results, where that comes from. That's where it comes from. It comes from the very end of voting on election night. The election judges are really closely making sure that the number of ballots counted that night matches the number of people that have signed in. There are similar processes in place for counting absentee ballots. Again, you're looking at the number of signature envelopes that have been accepted by the ballot board and comparing that with an actual number of ballots that got counted. So there is rigorous looking at data before you canvass your election results, and that's done in all 87 counties. The post-election review, Diane mentioned in her comments, what that, and so I should back up. So this actually came into play, or into place in 2006 when I was the Hennepin County Election Supervisor. I was approached by a group called Citizens for Election Integrity Minnesota. And they had seen what had happened in the Ohio 2004 presidential election where Ohio went to touchscreen voting. Our state never went to touchscreen voting. We always believe that the paper ballot is vital in determining the final results. So what this group wanted us to do was hand counts, an audit of the election, but when they came to me, they wanted a very detailed, thorough audit, and credit to them. I mean, we want to make sure that our voting systems are reading ballots correctly, but as election administrators, we have a lot of work to do after election night. We have to get the canvassing boards the information they need to certify the results. So we kind of landed on a compromise, and Diane very thoroughly walked through what you're going to be doing this fall. So all 87 counties at your canvass of the November general election randomly select precincts in your county, and the number that are randomly counted depends on the registered voter count in your county. So in Sherburne, it's 3, in Hennepin, it's more, and I don't have the exact number. But so the random precincts throughout the county are selected, and then races are hand counted in each of those precincts. And as Diane mentioned, this year it's the governor's race, the U.S. representative race. In 2020, it was the presidential race, the U.S. Senate race, and the U.S. congressional race. So they're hand counted and compared against the results that were the machine counted on election night. If the difference is more than 0.5%, then more precincts are chosen to be hand counted. If the differences still continue to be found in different precincts, then the entire county has to be recounted. This began in 2006. Ever since that process has begun, we never had to escalate to more precincts. That's how accurate our voting equipment is shown to be. I also mentioned in 2020, we had 5 legislative recounts. And it just so happened that all 3 vendors' equipment were used in those 5 districts. So Sherburne was in part of the Senate District 14 recount. There was Ramsey County, which is a Hart InterCivic customer, and then again, most of the other precincts are ES&S. But it was fortunate because we got to see all 3 voting systems counted votes accurately in 2020. And I think that's really key to note. The other thing I'll note is I actually met Mr. Reibel in the 2012 gubernatorial recount. We were both there at the Hennepin County Government Center, me as an election administrator, he as an observer. I remember the conversation we had well, so it's good to see you tonight, Mr. Reibel. But I mentioned that because so our state in its history has only had 4 statewide recounts. The 1962 gubernatorial race, in 2008, we actually had a Supreme Court statewide recount in the state primary, and we all kind of laughed about, oh, this is the second statewide recount we've ever had to face. Isn't this terrible? But of course, counting that one race in a low turnout primary wasn't that difficult. Then the U.S. Senate 2008 recount happened, and as you know, that went far into the next year before the winner was declared. But I mentioned that, and then the 2012 gubernatorial recount was the 4th one. The reason I mentioned that, all these recounts show our systems work. You can say, well, in 2008, Senator Coleman was ahead, and then afterward, Senator Franken was declared the winner, but the reason came down to rejected absentee ballots, and that all got litigated. Senator Franken got more absentee ballots counted than Senator Coleman, but again, that was all examined in the courts, and that's the way election contests happen. Any disputed election should be going through the recount process, and then if that's still questionable, then you go through an election contest, and that's all spelled out in statute. I'll kind of conclude my remarks with a couple things. The push for hand counts concerns me greatly. I'll say why. Your smallest precinct in Sherburne County is Haven Township Precinct 2, which has 93 registered voters. You think, well, it shouldn't be that difficult to count 93 ballots, but it's not a matter of counting 93 ballots in that township. Every ballot in November in your county will have at least 38 races on it. So federal, state, county, and judicial races. There are 38 contests that will be on every ballot in Sherburne County. I didn't look at your cities, school districts, and township races, but obviously many of them will have them as well. So it's over 40 races. Each race has to be counted individually. So you're not just counting the 93 ballots in Haven Township, you're counting 93 ballots over 40 times. Your largest precinct is actually Becker Township, which has it's about 3,700 registered voters, so they would end up counting over 142,000 ballots. This all has to be done in 24 hours. All the materials from the polling place have to come back to Diane at the county within 24 hours. To count 142,000 ballots, that is not even a remote possibility. I'll also name, at every recount that I've participated in, it's the human errors that show up. So the recount process, if you're not aware, or the hand count process, if you're not aware, is you take the stack of ballots from the precincts, you give candidate A over here, candidate B, candidate A, and again, in a recount, it's 2 candidates, and many of your elections in November, it'll be multiple candidates. So you separate them into candidate piles, and then you count up these for candidate A into piles of 25, crisscrossing them. do the same over here, so you can count 25, 50, 75, 100, 106 votes in this pile. What we see in every recount, what we see during the post-election review is that people count piles of 24 or 26, and it throws it off. In the recounts, it's kind of easy to fix because you know what the machine read, so you think, well, that doesn't match, we should probably count the ballots again, and that happens in every recount, that some pile of ballots gets miscounted by humans. And I guess, so hand counts are less accurate than machine counts. It's been shown time and time again. They're more costly. It's not cheaper. I know someone mentioned it's half the cost. It's not. If you are seriously considering doing a hand count on election night, you don't want election judges that have been there since 6 in the morning through 10 at night now trying to accurately hand count ballots. You're going to want to bring in a fresh set of eyes. At the very minimum, you're going to want to do that to ensure that there is a more accurate count. And then there's no mechanism, as I mentioned, to know if you miscounted, because you're typically only going to count them once on election night. So if there are errors in the count, you're not going to know that. Someone can request a recount, obviously, but the threshold for a publicly paid recount is 0.5% in most races. In some races in our state, it's 0.25%. And so the exact number that the two candidates are off, you need to know that. And I'll back up. During our post-election review, there was a 2021 election law change that was pushed by the Citizens for Election Minnesota Integrity that helped create the law in 2006. From 2006 until 2020, the threshold was 0.5%. So if it deviated from the machine 0.5%, the hand count, then that's when it would trigger more precincts to be counted. In 2021, that was lowered. It's pretty close to 0.5%. Now, again, it's based on the total number the count is off versus the total number of ballots cast, and that's all spelled out in statute, but it's pretty close to being 0.5%. We supported that law. We know our voting equipment is that accurate. The other reason you don't want to go to hand counts, and Senator Kiffmeyer was then Secretary Kiffmeyer, one of your residents, when the 2002 Help America Vote Act law was passed, she was our Secretary of State, and we got federal money to replace her voting equipment. One of her things, and I give her credit for it, was she wanted an optical scan voting device in every precinct, because at the time, many of our greater Minnesota polling places would bundle their ballots up from the polling place on election night, bring it back to their county government center to be centrally tabulated. One of the reasons Senator Kiffmeyer, and I agree with her, thought this wasn't fair because Metro County voters that had optical scan precinct count were able to, if you run a ballot through a precinct count machine, it catches error. So when the upcoming state primary, less than a month from now, happens, I guarantee there's going to be ballots throughout Minnesota where the voter crossover votes, meaning they vote for candidates in different political parties. They're not allowed to do that under our law. The machine catches that and tells the voter, we're not going to count your ballot. And the voter is then given the option to correct their ballot to make sure it gets counted. If you're hand counting, the voter doesn't have that chance. And that's why Senator Kiffmeyer really pushed for optical scan voting devices in every single precinct in the state. And I will conclude my remarks now with part of the post-election review that our office gets involved with. So after Diane is done hand counting the ballots in her 3 randomly chosen precincts, that goes into a pool statewide, and we select random precincts out of that existing pool, and we do a more thorough audit of all the materials that were used in the election. And Diane probably wasn't too big a fan of mine, but we really expanded what we had been doing previous to my starting in this position, because I had been a victim of being chosen for one of these things when I was a Minnetonka city clerk, and it's a lot of extra work to pull together all these materials and then have somebody from the county just kind of hand count. It's an audit, but it was a very dry audit, let's say. There was no communication. In Minnetonka, you should have done this better. In Minnetonka, you did this great. So I wanted to incorporate that into our 2021 when we reviewed the 2020 election. So we asked for far more materials from the counties. We did get some pushback, but all counties eventually complied. And it wasn't to punish people or look for things that were wrong. Really, my focus was on Since we are required to do a training of all 87 counties, I wanted to find common mistakes that were being made in Minnesota, and that was on us if there were common mistakes, because if different counties are doing this exact same thing incorrectly, I wanted to know about it, and we would make sure we train better on that. The other thing is it gave me actual data to come speak before boards like you today. I know better what actually happened on the ground in 2020 because of talking to many county auditors during this process. I didn't participate. Diane had a mail ballot precinct selected in Princeton. I did not participate in that one. I did try to sit in on as many as I can, and I promise this is my closing remark, but the one that really sticks to mind was in Brown County where the county auditor was retiring. And I did do that audit, and the night before I was reviewing all these materials she had submitted, and I got to her city clerk township training, which is a video, at about 10 o'clock at night. I thought, well, I'll just kind of watch some of it to get the flavor of what she was doing. I watched the entire 2 hours because it was a tremendous reminder of all the many election administrators I've been fortunate to work with throughout my 26-year career, including Diane, including all our current county auditors. They did a remarkable job in 2020 running an election in a pandemic. And so I was really thankful that Jean in Brown County did this. It was just a simple video with her standing in front of a projected PowerPoint. So it wasn't like fancy, it wasn't spellbinding, but it was just, she covered everything just great, the exact same way I would have covered it myself. And so the dedication from all our 87 local partners at the counties and our cities and township partners, everyone did a tremendous job in 2020. I just want to thank them publicly for that. And with that, I will certainly stand for any questions. You probably have a question about the 206.58.
Thank you very much. I have a question about 206.58. Yeah, just clarify some.
It's like you're reading our minds.
Yeah.
So respectfully, I would say that I read the test lab report exactly opposite of Mr. Reibel. What the test lab report is showing is that when Dominion certified its system originally, it was 5.0, the version that was being used. And that's what's in the test lab report, it says new system 5.0. But if you read to the very next line that you were copied on, it says 5.5, and that's what they were trying to get certified, the upgrade to 5.5. And under that, it clearly says modification of an existing certified system. If you read the entire report, it's repeatedly mentioned it's a modification of an existing voting system. I think the analogy I would use is I'm a devoted iPhone user, and periodically Apple will push out iOS updates to me. I can choose to install it, I can choose not to install it. I install it because often it's related to security. But once I install that updated iOS update, I don't have a new iPhone. I have an updated iPhone. Certainly it might function a little differently. It's probably a lot more secure or a little bit more secure, but it's not a new phone. And I think that's analogous to what 206, the entire chapter, many provisions in that provide for. Because I would also point to 206.56, which defines what an electronic voting system is. And it's a laundry list, everything down to a pen, to the secrecy sleeves that are typically manila envelopes that voters use to keep their votes private. That's included in the definition of a voting system. So if you really want Diane to do these public demonstrations every time she buys new pens, I think that's beyond the scope of the statute. And I think to address the concern, well, why aren't we getting a public demonstration? I'd point back to the public accuracy test. The public accuracy test gets at any upgrade to any part of the system, the machine is still reading ballots accurately.
Sir, would you do a follow-on on that real quick while the commissioners are thinking of their other questions? So if, I'm assuming you've spoken with your in-house legal counsel on your interpretation of statute, as have we. If a group disagrees respectfully with your interpretation of statute, is there recourse, as you noted, in the courts then?
Yes.
Okay, and has anybody challenged in the courts yet that interpretation?
I'm sorry, no, there have not been any challenges in court.
All right, thank you, sir. And one other follow-on then, and the public accuracy test, we are still scheduled to do that, is that correct?
You would have to check with Diane, but it's a requirement of state statute, so I'm
Okay.
almost 100% sure she is going to do that.
So in your opinion, that's sufficient then with this new software upgrade to demonstrate still the validity of the software system?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair, so there is a legal option. I mean, obviously in this room, there's disagreement. And they could bring forth a case, I don't know, would it be district court or where? So that's, and that's probably where this is going to have to play out, in my mind.
Because, Madam Chair, Commissioners, even if we agreed that with the interpretation of 206.58, that this, Mr. Weibel is correct, we couldn't tell Diane she has to do that. Again, we don't have the authority to do that. The county is the one that is in charge of its voting processes, and if there's a dispute, it would still go to court.
Madam Chair, may I throw in a question? There was also a question about recounts. And our understanding of statute is that should a candidate choose to ask for a hand recount, even if it's beyond the 0.5%, that is allowed under state statute, although it's at the candidate's expense. Is that what I understand?
Yes, that is correct. Any losing candidate can request a recount. The difference being if it's beyond the threshold for a publicly funded count, then the candidate has to pay for it. And typically how that's done is the candidate will pick like 3 precincts from the district to first have counted, and once they see the machines are working in those 3 precincts, they typically call off the rest of the recount. But
And is
they
that-
certainly can have it go to the end.
Is that what happened with the Senate recount in District 14 then?
I'm going from memory, but I believe that was what happened.
So it is a candidate's choice to ask for a hand recount.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
I had one question. There was a comment made earlier in regards to ballots being mailed to people's houses. Could you clarify on that? Is that actually ballots being mailed, or is that by organizations that are mailing things that look like ballots to get you to understand that you have that option?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, that's a great question. We heard that often in the 2020 election. Everybody I talked to that had that scenario arise, they were talking about absentee applications. There were groups, nonprofit groups, political groups that were mailing out absentee applications to voters across their states. So many voters, including myself, got multiple applications. I have not heard any voter got an actual ballot. And it's almost impossible because once an application is received by a county, they create an absentee record within the statewide voter registration system that's unique to that voter in that ballot. So if the voter submits a second application, the county can certainly follow up and say, did you screw up your first one? Do you want a new ballot? Before they issue the new ballot, they have to spoil their initial ballot. So no voter can have multiple ballots in SVRS.
So for clarification, you're saying that what came to people's mailboxes from various organizations to encourage you to sign up for absentee balloting, you would have taken one of those down to where your ballot, your polling place was. You would have presented it for your ballot to then vote, but you would only get that opportunity once,
Correct,
no matter how many came to your house.
correct.
Thank you.
I did hear one case, I think it was in December, where somebody claimed to have 2 ballots. When they opened up the 2 ballots, one was the state primary and one was the state general. They didn't remember applying for both ballots. And before anybody, now that I have the floor, but before anybody, if anyone's question, well, can someone absentee vote and then show up at their polling place and vote? No, they can't, because again, it's all tracked in the statewide voter registration system. Any accepted absentee ballot, the voter's signature line gets an AB put on the signature line, so if that voter were to show up, they can't vote.
And then, Madam Chair, in regards to the safety and security of the voting equipment and the transmission of Could you go into a little bit of detail about the process that is done to assure that we have secure transactions of that information?
Sure. Madam Chair, members of the board. So modems have been used in our state basically since 1998. Hennepin County is the first one to implement modems in their voting equipment. So it's been used throughout since 1998. There is a prohibition in statute that the modems cannot be activated until the official results tapes are run. And so again, I mentioned before the actual official results are printed on that tape, any results that get transmitted up to our office, they're unofficial until the state canvassing board certifies election.
So then that gets double-checked and verified? And it's my understanding that these transmission portals are like encrypted, they're basically given out just for that period of time, and then they are deleted and no longer used. Weren't used prior, will not be used after.
Madam Chair, members of the board, that is correct. The modems that are used in other industries such as the banking industry where it's very important to keep the data private. So there are it's encrypted. There are various measures put in place that ensure that the data is not corrupt when it gets back to who's ever, typically the county, getting it back.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just a quick follow-on on the absentee ballots. Was some of the confusion that there were multiple organizations sending out absentee ballot applications and then with that sample ballots? I seem to recall even at my house getting, a couple. I don't recall being totally confused, but is that something that your office is looking at and there may be a legislative solution to further clarify that you don't get pseudo ballots in the mail to confuse voters?
There actually was legislation proposed in both the House and Senate in 2021 that addressed that very issue. I think in both the House and Senate version of the bill, it required any application to be clearly marked as not coming from government, number one, and that this is an application. There was language in one of the houses, and I don't remember which body it was, that dealt with the sample ballot issue, basically saying they didn't want sample ballots being sent out by private organizations. There was no agreement in conference committee. It did not pass.
Anyone else have any?
I think